Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr. Speaker, that was an embarrassment. That speech from that member, supposedly the great hope, supposedly the great economic hope for the Labour Party, just gave a budget policy statement speech going over everything that's unrelated to the budget that Labour wants to run as their stock standard attack lines that are meaningless, that New Zealanders don't agree with. If that was what a PhD in the Labour Party stands for, I don't have great hope for the next Labour government in about 10 years' time. Mr. Speaker, when one listens to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance give a speech on the budget policy statement, and also when one listens to him in the Finance and Expenditure Committee, Mr. Speaker, the public can see that this economy is in good shape. It's in safe hands. It's in the hands of a Finance Minister and a Prime Minister that's helping to grow this economy, that's helping to get more jobs for New Zealanders, that's ensuring that there are more people able to put food on the table at home, able to get their kids better educated, able to support their families when they need it. And Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the fact that we have a Finance Minister of the calibre of the Honourable Bill English. And Mr. Speaker, the speeches from the other side of the House so far are proving that they just are not fit to govern, are not fit to hold the Treasury benches and deliver a budget policy statement of their own. Mr. Speaker, when Mr. David Clark, doctor, I don't believe it. I find it hard to believe he's a doctor, but Dr. David Clark was giving his speech earlier. He had this interesting conundrum. He was talking about his view that supposedly the government cuts services, but at the same time he yaps on and on about in this House about the government borrowing for money. Which is it? You cannot have it both ways. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that when they were going out of office, this economy had already gone into recession before National took the Treasury benches. And Mr. Speaker, the only reason why this government had to borrow more was to maintain important services for New Zealand after they allowed the economy to go into recession. And so, Mr. Speaker, if they want to stand in this House, if they want to talk about borrowings, then, Mr. Speaker, they should start to look themselves in the mirror because they let the economy go into recession before we came into government. And, Mr. Speaker, they also want to talk a lot about ACC at the moment. Well, Mr. Speaker, let's put some facts back on the table. Mr. Speaker, when Labour left office, they left a $4.8 billion shortfall in the ACC accounts. And Mr. Speaker, this government had to clean up their mess. This government had to step in and take action. But if the argument from the Labour Party is that governments should always listen to the advice from the ACC board about what to do with levies, let's look at what would have been the case in 2010. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the government increased the earners' levy by 30 cents. If we were to have listened to the Labour Party and taken the advice of ACC, which recommended a $1.10 increase in the earner levy, Mr. Speaker, then New Zealanders would have faced an earners' levy increase almost 4 times what this government actually increased it by. If we followed the Labour Party's advice, which was to always listen to the ACC board, when it comes to the motor vehicle levy, which we had to increase by $47, we would have been putting it up by $100, more than double what it actually went up by. So, Mr. Speaker, if we had have listened to what the Labour Party wanted on ACC, after they left a big black hole in those accounts, then, Mr. Speaker, New Zealanders would have seen huge costs mounting up alongside them, and, Mr. Speaker, that would have been unacceptable. So I don't believe the Labour Party has any credibility when it comes to ACC. They should stop preaching about that. But, Mr. Speaker, this budget policy statement follows on from a number of budget policy statements and a number of budgets that have been delivered by this government that is leading to higher growth, more jobs, better health and education services for New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I think New Zealanders look at governments and say, how are you going to help to create economic settings to create more jobs in the economy. Mr. Speaker, we are delivering economic settings that leads to more jobs. We are delivering more jobs in the economy. Mr. Speaker, Northland happens to be a topic of conversation right now in this Parliament and around the country. Well, Mr. Speaker, 7,500 New Zealanders in Northland right now have gained jobs in the last year. Mr. Speaker, jobs are the issue that we're happy to talk about any time, because in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, more people are employed. 7,500 more people employed in Northland. When the Statistics Department sent out the press releases about growth in regions earlier today, Northland was one of the standout examples of growth taking place in the regions. 7.8% growth in Northland in the last year. Mr. Speaker, when the Labour Party gets up and talks about Northland going backwards, when the new lapdog for the Labour Party, the Honourable Winston Peters, gets up and talks about Northland going backwards, they are absolutely wrong. Because, Mr. Speaker, it's one of the fastest growing regions in the country. We are proud of that. We are proud of the fact that we're able to talk about that story in the by-election coming forward. Mr. Speaker, the economy has improved a huge amount, and, Mr. Speaker, New Zealanders are seeing the benefits of that. Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk about transport briefly when we consider the budget policy statement and how this government spends money on behalf of New Zealanders, because transport is such a vital aspect of what government can do to provide better infrastructure for New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, we're proud of the fact that up in Northland, the Puhoi to Wellsford roading project, a vital link for Northland, is going to be going ahead under our watch. Mr. Speaker, just yesterday we announced further funding, for example, for the Waikato Expressway, an extra $1 billion going towards that project. In Auckland, I'm an Auckland MP, I'm proud of the fact that, Mr. Speaker, we are working to accelerate about $10 billion worth of projects in the budget for Auckland. Mr. Speaker, those vital transport links help to create jobs, they help business to move goods and services, and, Mr. Speaker, they help employees get to work, and they help everyday New Zealanders. On the transport matter, particularly when we're talking about Auckland, I just want to make a point as a local MP in regards to transport projects in Auckland, that the Amity Auckland Manukau Eastern Transport Initiative is an initiative that the government, when the Prime Minister made a speech a couple of years ago about transport priorities, outlined it as the #2 project that the government is working on in Auckland. We're working to put together a package which would allow us to assist the Auckland Council to speed up the construction of that project. Right now, the Auckland Transport Agency is looking to make some devastating changes to that project, and as a local MP, myself, Maurice Williamson and other MPs that would see their electorates benefit from that project, we will be working hard to fight against what the Auckland Transport Agency and Auckland Council is doing on that. But transport as a priority for Auckland and as a priority for this government is right up there, and, Mr. Speaker, we're proud of that fact. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Labour Party don't like listening to speeches on the budget policy statement in this House after they've been delivered by our Finance Minister and our government, because, Mr. Speaker, they don't have a record that stacks up to scrutiny when it comes to their promises. Let's just remember, every time they talk about debt, every time they talk about deficits, that the Labour Party promised $28 billion of extra spending under any budgets they wanted to deliver. Mr. Parker, who's squawking at the moment, was the finance spokesperson for... Well, he is, Mr. Speaker.
Come on.
Point of order, David Parker.
Check that on the basis of that response to my interjections, my earlier interjections will be recorded as they ought to be in Hansard. Could you please rule on that, Mr. Speaker?
If it's a normal practice for interjections like that to cause the recording of the comments, they will be recorded. It was clear that there was an out of order response from Jami-Lee Ross.
Right. the interjections, I apologise if I've hurt someone's feelings, the interjections from Mr Parker, who is going on at the moment and has been going on about debt, as has other members of the Labour Party. When they come to talking about debt, Mr Speaker, they should think about the extra spending that they were promising at the last election, $28 billion combined with the Green Party and the New Zealand First left-wing bloc. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
No, your time's expired. Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Memorable budget, sir, there on